Welcome to the Urban Herald. You know, as part of the team here, we spend a lot of time sifting through stories, really trying to dig deep and unearth the kind of hidden truths that really matter. And today we're diving into a saga that, honestly, sounds like something ripped straight from I don't know, a gothic thriller novel. It's a narrative so strange, so layered, it kind of defies easy explanation. You've got all these chilling elements like a decaying mansion that looks completely out of place, almost haunted, especially considering its very opulent surroundings. Then there's this eccentric recluse, just shrouded in mystery. And beneath all that, a hidden history, one tied to a global fugitive, someone accused of crimes so profoundly disturbing they echo across continents. But this isn't just, your standard true crime story, though it definitely has those suspenseful, chilling moments. It's also a really stark look at some deeply ingrained systemic issues. We're talking about the insidious, often invisible epidemic of modern slavery, the frankly frightening power of wealth to shield people from justice, and also, thankfully, the quiet, unwavering heroism of ordinary folks who just refuse to look the other way. Now, this deep dive we're doing today, it was profoundly inspired by the absolutely groundbreaking work of the podcast Woman of the Abandoned House that was by Folia and Chico Filiti. They first brought this incredible, almost unbelievable saga to light. So what we want to do is take you even deeper into this labyrinthine case, peel back those layers, look at the mechanisms that allowed such a nightmare to unfold, and crucially, why it took so long for the truth to finally surface.
Right. And I think what's really crucial for you, the listener, to grasp right from the beginning as we sort of embark on this journey is that this isn't solely about one individual's capacity for brutality or, a singular isolated act of horror. This story, it really forces all of us, maybe a bit uncomfortably, to confront some of our deepest assumptions about what truly lies beneath the polished surface of seemingly ordinary lives and behind those privileged facades that so many people present to the world. It's a really stark reflection, I think, on societal failures, on the systemic loopholes, the blind spots that enabled such profound cruelty to persist, and to persist openly in plain sight for such a very, very long time. So what we're going to try and unpack for you today is this journey. It takes us from the opulent, almost sun-drenched streets of Sao Paulo in Brazil, all the way to the historic, frankly hallowed battlefields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania over in the United States. And then eventually back again to Sao Paulo.
And throughout this, it reveals in really stark detail how a certain kind of immense, ingrained privilege can construct this almost impenetrable shield against the very idea of justice. It's a chilling reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the most horrific secrets are hidden right there in plain sight, often dismissed as eccentricity, while profound suffering unfolds completely unseen.
Okay, so with that image in mind, that hidden horror, let's really start by painting a picture of where the story physically took root. Can you imagine, just for a moment, taking a stroll through Higienópolis? It's one of São Paulo's most affluent neighborhoods, very sought after. You picture these wide, leafy streets, trees rustling, and the buildings all around you, they just gleam with this polished modernity. Apartment blocks, businesses, grand homes. They're all testament to, immense wealth, undeniable success, often impeccable taste. It really is like a postcard image of urban sophistication, a real jewel in São Paulo's crown.
Absolutely. A place where you'd expect everything to be just so.
Yeah.
Maintained, orderly, reflecting that status.
Exactly. And then you see it. And it's this jarring anomaly, something that just feels like it shouldn't exist in that kind of manicured landscape. It's a 3-story brick mansion, but it doesn't just look old. It looks like it's been actively, almost deliberately trying to collapse for maybe, I don't know, the better part of a century. The paint is chipped, it's peeling like sunburnt skin. The windows are grimy, opaque, almost blacked out, like they're trying to hide whatever decay is inside. You might even see this tangled mess of overgrown vines just creeping aggressively up the brickwork. It's such a stark, almost defiant contrast to the meticulously kept lawns and the freshly painted facades of all its neighbors. It genuinely looks like it's crumbling. A monument to neglect, really.
It really stands out then, doesn't it? In that kind of environment, something so visibly dilapidated would be impossible to miss.
Oh, completely. And of course, the neighbors noticed. They whispered about it. How could you not? They often referred to the woman inside as, a crazy woman. Or sometimes, maybe with a mix of, dismissiveness and genuine confusion, they'd call her doidinha, which translates roughly to, a little crazy one. A diminutive, almost strangely affectionate term in a way. They'd catch these unsettling glimpses of her, peering out from behind those grimy windows. And her face, apparently, was often caked in what looked like this thick, white cream or maybe an ointment. It gave her this almost ghostly, mask-like appearance. Really bizarre.
Hmm. That detail about the white cream is striking. It adds another layer of, well, visual oddity to the whole picture, like a deliberate barrier.
Right, and this is where the story gets particularly interesting, I think. Despite how striking it was, how almost theatrically strange this whole setup was, the crumbling house, the woman with the white face, people in the neighborhood largely just accepted her. She wasn't just an anomaly, she somehow became this weird, almost gothic fixture, this extraordinary presence that somehow, inexplicably, settled into the mundane rhythm of everyday life in this very upscale area. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? From maybe a sociological perspective, how does something so obviously abnormal, so visually jarring, become so utterly normalized within a community to the point where people just sort of accept it instead of asking serious questions?
That's a really crucial observation, and it leads us straight into, I think, a particularly compelling aspect of this case, the psychology of acceptance that was clearly at play there. What we often see in human behavior, especially perhaps in affluent or, tightly knit communities, is this phenomenon. You could call it normalcy bias or maybe psychological distancing.
Mm.
When we're confronted with something jarring, something that just doesn't fit our neat little preconceived notions of how things should be, our brains often try to rationalize it away or compartmentalize it just to avoid the discomfort or maybe the perceived responsibility to intervene.
So labeling her crazy was kind of a convenient way out.
Exactly. People might label her crazy or eccentric, and that label, it serves as this convenient mental shortcut. It allows them to dismiss the deeper, potentially more unsettling implications of what they're seeing. It's simply easier, isn't it, to whisper about a doidina, this sort of harmlessly odd figure, than it is to confront the possibility that something truly sinister might be festering right there, within their own affluent, supposedly safe neighborhood. That old notion of out of sight, out of mind really comes into focus here, even though, paradoxically, the anomaly was literally right there, directly in plain sight. It highlights a kind of societal blind spot, a collective turning away.
A willful ignorance, almost.
Perhaps, or at least a subconscious one. And what these neighbors gossiping over coffee or whatever didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly have known, was the true identity of this woman, this Mari, as some might have called her, the one they saw through the grimy window panes. She was, in fact, Margarida Bonetti. And she was far, far more than just an eccentric local heiress living in a decaying mansion. She was an FBI fugitive, a woman who had fled the United States more than 2 decades earlier.
An FBI fugitive hiding in plain sight in Hedgeonopolis.
Precisely. She was accused of crimes so horrific, so profoundly disturbing, they genuinely sound like something from a much darker, crueler age. They're like a historical echo of, well, some of humanity's worst tendencies towards exploitation and cruelty. And the irony, the sheer irony of that gilded cage concept in this context is almost unbearable, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
This house, the very symbol of her family's immense wealth and status, the place she grew up surrounded by every luxury imaginable, had now become this fortress of decay. It was a self-imposed prison, yes, absolutely. But it was one meticulously designed, it seems, to keep the world, and specifically, justice, firmly at bay. She had constructed this decrepit sanctuary, ironically, using her privilege as its very foundation, hiding right there in plain sight, camouflaged by this carefully cultivated or perhaps genuinely devolved eccentricity. And all this just hints at the true depth of her secret, a past that wasn't merely eccentric or just bizarre, but was absolutely criminal, a past she had desperately tried to bury within those crumbling walls, maybe hoping it would simply fade away with the peeling paint and the crumbling brick.
Okay, so how does someone like Margarida Bonetti, born into this prominent medical family in Sao Paulo, surrounded by every comfort, end up like that? In this bizarre, chilling exile, a self-imposed prisoner in her own childhood home. It sounds like her life started on a completely different path, a much more promising one, right? She married Rene Bonetti. He was an accomplished satellite engineer, a man with a really prestigious career trajectory ahead of him. And their journey, their move to the United States back in 1979, it was meant to be that quintessential success story, wasn't it? The narrative of, Brazilian talent making it big on the international stage. He was working for Intelsat, a major satellite communications company. It really sounded like the perfect embodiment of the American dream, almost. A testament to ambition, opportunity, a bright future ahead.
It had all the hallmarks of that narrative, definitely. The educated couple moving for a high-profile job, settling in the U.S.
Exactly. But then, here's the detail, the pivotal detail, the one that would become horrifyingly insidious over time. They didn't go alone. They brought with them a young woman, a domestic worker, someone who was illiterate, had served Margarita's family since she herself was practically a child, and she was described as, well, this is chilling, a gift from Margarita's parents to their daughter and son-in-law.
A gift. Wow. That language is just incredibly loaded. It speaks volumes immediately, doesn't it?
It really does. And while maybe on the surface it was presented as some kind of benevolent act of patronage, continuing a family tradition or something, this seemingly innocuous decision was in fact the insidious, horrifying beginning of a modern-day nightmare. A nightmare that would stretch out over decades, laying the foundation for truly unimaginable suffering and, well, profound human rights abuses.
That concept, the domestic worker as a gift, it immediately establishes such a profoundly disturbing and, frankly, dangerous power dynamic, wouldn't you say? It fundamentally reframes the relationship. It's not employer and employee, where both parties, theoretically at least, have rights and responsibilities negotiated terms.
No, not at all.
Instead, it inherently implies a relationship much closer to ownership. Exploitation is only built into the premise from the start. It really lays the groundwork for the kind of systematic dehumanization that tragically unfolded over the next 20 years. And think about where they settled. The Bonettis set up home in Gettysburg, Maryland. Gettysburg, a town absolutely steeped in the history of American freedom, justice, the fight for human dignity. Some of the most pivotal battles for liberty were fought right there.
The irony is just staggering.
It's a profound and cruel paradox, isn't it? Inside their seemingly ordinary four-bedroom suburban home, in this town symbolizing freedom, they were methodically, incrementally creating this world of profound unfreedom, a direct, brutal contradiction to the very ideals the town represents.
So what did that unfreedom actually look like on a daily basis? What were the conditions?
Well, for nearly 20 years, this young woman, the domestic worker, she was subjected to conditions that federal prosecutors, when they finally got involved, unequivocally described as modern slavery. And it's truly difficult to grasp the sheer, grinding detail of this existence without feeling just immense revulsion. She was forced to work these grueling 12-hour days, 7 days a week. No respite, no days off, no holidays, nothing. Just a continuous, relentless cycle of labor.
12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 20 years.
For nearly 20 years. And her living quarters. They were in the basement, a windowless, bathroomless room. Her only way to bathe was with buckets of water that had to be brought down to her.
Just basic human dignity stripped away.
Completely. But the cruelty, it didn't stop at just physical hardship or deprivation. To add this particularly chilling layer of psychological control, the Bonettis meticulously kept the refrigerator and all the food cabinets locked. They severely restricted her access to food.
They locked the food away from her.
Locked it away. So this wasn't just neglect, you understand. This was a deliberate, methodical, and utterly sadistic campaign of dehumanization. It was designed to keep her weak, physically and mentally, to keep her dependent and utterly submissive. And I think one particularly striking aspect here is how the abuse wasn't just about the physical hardship, the long hours, the poor conditions. It was a systematic dismantling of her basic human rights, her fundamental dignity, reducing a living, breathing person to property, to a mere tool for their convenience.
And as those years bled into decades, you said the abuse intensified. It got worse.
It seemed so. The accounts suggest it became even more insidious, more horrifying. And Margarida Bonetti, she was identified both by the victim and later by investigators as the primary aggressor, the main source of the violence and cruelty. She would apparently regularly beat the victim with her fists, even with her shoes. She'd pull her hair until it came out in clumps.
Oh, my God.
And on one occasion, an utterly horrific incident, she apparently threw boiling hot soup directly into the victim's face. It left her permanently scarred. A constant physical reminder etched onto her face of the brutal conditions she was forced to endure every single day.
Boiling soup, that's assault. Serious assault.
Absolutely. And those physical scars, they were matched, you have to imagine, by the psychological ones. Etched just as deeply into the victim's psyche from the constant terror, the degradation, the utter lack of hope.
You also mentioned medical neglect earlier. That sounds like another layer of just calculated cruelty.
It was. Beyond the direct physical assaults, medical neglect emerged as this constant, terrifying tool of control. It was like a slow, agonizing form of torture playing out over years. For instance, when the victim suffered a severe cut on her leg, and this tragically led to osteomyelitis, which is a very serious bone infection, the Bonettis denied her any medical attention. Not for days, not for weeks, but for more than an entire year.
A year with a bone infection, that's incredibly dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. Osteomyelitis can lead to permanent disability, chronic pain, even amputation.
if it's not treated properly and promptly. Allowing it to fester for a year is, well, it's hard to find words for it.
And wasn't there something else? Something even more shocking.
Yes. Even more shockingly, perhaps, a tumor started to develop in her abdomen. And it grew, apparently, to the size of a cantaloupe.
A cantaloupe.
That was the description used later. A cantaloupe-sized tumor. And Rene, the husband, he repeatedly and cruelly refused to allow her to see a doctor for this growing mass inside her.
Just refused.
The reasoning isn't entirely clear from the accounts, beyond sheer control and callousness. But the fact is, they allowed this condition, this potentially life-threatening condition, to worsen over a significant period. It wasn't just neglect anymore. It was effectively sentencing her to prolonged suffering, risking her life, potentially causing irreparable damage. It speaks to this profound moral void, doesn't it? An absolute absence of basic human empathy that's truly, truly impossible to fully comprehend. And that really highlights the multiple reinforcing layers of cruelty that we're operating here. Medical neglect, in this specific context, it really transcends mere omission, doesn't it? It becomes an active, prolonged form of torture. It's a slow, agonizing denial of basic care that not only exacerbates physical suffering immensely, but also profoundly reinforces the perpetrator's absolute power and control. Your pain doesn't matter. Your health doesn't matter. Only my will matters.
And all this was happening alongside the physical abuse and the deprivation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And coupled with that relentless physical abuse, the psychological chains they forged were just as potent, maybe even more so in some ways. Remember, her passport was confiscated after her visa expired. This instantly rendered her an undocumented person, making her completely vulnerable with a foreign legal system she likely didn't understand.
Ah, so they weaponized her immigration status.
Absolutely. The Bonettis expertly leveraged this acute vulnerability. They used constant threats, threats of imprisonment, threats of deportation, to instill this overwhelming, paralyzing fear. It enforced unwavering obedience. How could she possibly fight back or seek help when the consequence might be jail in a foreign country? And then there's the isolation. She was forbidden, strictly forbidden, from leaving the house unsupervised. She couldn't make any friends, couldn't have any outside contact whatsoever. They effectively cut her off from any potential avenue of help, any chance of escape, anyone who might notice and intervene.
So it created this perfect prison, but without any actual bars.
That's a very good way to put it. It begs that crucial question, doesn't it? How does this perfect storm, this combination of extreme isolation, calculated psychological manipulation, and relentless physical abuse, create a prison without visible bars? It's a chillingly effective system. The victim becomes utterly dependent on her captors, while also being profoundly terrified of them. Every potential escape route, physical or psychological, is systematically blocked off. And more broadly, thinking about the bigger picture, it starkly underscores how alarmingly easy it can be for perpetrators to exploit the precarious, undocumented status of vulnerable individuals, how they can transform that legal precarity into a modern-day form of bondage. It's a devastating consequence of, well, legal vulnerability compounded by human cruelty.
So, okay, nearly 2 decades of this absolute nightmare unfolding. Behind closed doors, hidden in plain sight in this ordinary suburban house, how? How did it finally end? How did she get out? The story of her rescue is actually a really powerful testament, isn't it, to the extraordinary impact just one person can have. One person who simply refuses to look away, whose conscience just compels them to act. And that person was Vicki Schneider. She was a neighbor of the Bonettis, described as a devout Catholic.
Vicki Schneider.
Yeah.
The angel next door, as some might call her in retrospect.
Exactly. And despite there being a significant language barrier between them, Vicki spoke English. The victim, primarily Portuguese Vicki, using her, I guess, keen observation skills and just innate empathy, she began to notice things. Subtle, maybe, but undeniable signs of distress. She noticed the victim's consistently fearful demeanor, the way she seemed to almost shrink in the presence of the Bonettis. She glimpsed unexplained injuries on her occasionally, and she noticed her profound, unsettling isolation, how she was rarely seen outside the house and always accompanied if she was. Never alone.
So she was picking up on these nonverbal cues, these inconsistencies that just didn't sit right with her.
Precisely. But initially, when Vicki tried to raise the alarm, tried to talk to others about her concerns, her attempts were met with that all-too-common skepticism, the kind that plagues so many of these hidden abuse cases. People would dismiss her concerns, wave them away, saying things like, oh, it's just a private family matter, or suggesting she shouldn't interfere, that it wasn't really her business. This initial resistance, this societal tendency to look away or rationalize, it's such a familiar, frustrating hurdle in these situations, isn't it? Where the default often seems to be ignore rather than investigate.
It absolutely is. It's much easier to assume things are fine or that it's not our place.
But Vicky Schneider, she wasn't deterred. Not by the skepticism from others, not by the perceived social boundaries of minding her own business, not even by the inherent discomfort of stepping into what others were framing as private. Her resolve apparently only strengthened.
And that's what's particularly compelling here, I think. Vicky's sheer, unwavering persistence in the face of that widespread societal indifference. Her refusal to just accept the easy explanation, her willingness to look past the discomfort and keep pushing. That was a truly crucial turning point. Not just in this case, but it's often the key in so many other hidden abuse situations that absolutely rely on silence and complicity to continue.
What was driving her? What made her so persistent?
Well, she revealed later that her motivation was very deeply rooted in her faith. She said she was specifically inspired by a letter she'd read from Pope John Paul II, a letter about restoring equality to enslaved people. And reading that, she felt this profound, undeniable moral and Christian duty to intervene. She saw the victim's plight not just as a casual concern or something sad happening next door, but as a direct call to action, a deeply held conviction that compelled her to move beyond just observing and worrying, to actually doing something, taking direct action.
So she decided she had to get involved actively. How did she go about it?
Well, with this unwavering conviction driving her, she started to meticulously devise a rescue plan. It wasn't impulsive. She sought out help. She found a priest who not only believed her story, which was a significant step in itself, but who also understood the gravity of the situation and was willing to actively help. With his support, they carefully planned the escape. They chose a specific time when they knew the Bonettis would be traveling out of the house. This was crucial to ensure the safest possible window for intervention, minimizing the risk for the victim as much as possible.
But after nearly 20 years of that kind of control, was the victim ready to just walk out? Was she willing to cooperate?
That's a really important point. After almost 2 decades of relentless psychological manipulation, of brutal conditioning, the victim was, completely understandably, initially hesitant. Hesitant to cooperate with the FBI, even when help was finally tangibly within her reach. Even when freedom was literally being offered to her on a plate.
The fear must have been overwhelming.
Exactly. Those psychological chains of fear and dependency, they were still profoundly strong. Making trust, especially trust in authority figures, after being threatened by her captors about those very authorities, incredibly difficult. But then came this truly pivotal moment, a moment of connection. A black nun, who herself was a former domestic worker from Brazil, was brought in to speak with the victim.
Someone who could truly understand her background, her experience.
Precisely. This nun, drawing from her own shared experience or cultural understanding, speaking from a place of deep empathy, she gently encouraged the victim to finally tell the truth, to speak her reality. And she provided this crucial reassurance, telling her that justice was God's responsibility, implying perhaps that the victim didn't have to carry the immense burden of seeking justice all by herself, that she could trust in a higher power or simply trust that others would now carry that fight. And this powerful connection, spiritual, cultural, experiential, it seemed to give the victim the immense strength she needed, the strength to finally provide her full testimony, to at last break that agonizing silence that had trapped her, suffocated her for so long. It's just a powerful testament, isn't it, to the transformative power of human connection, of understanding and shared experience, especially in the absolute darkest of circumstances.
So she tells her story, the FBI gets involved. What did that investigation look like? It must have been incredibly complex, trying to prove abuse that spanned nearly 20 years.
Oh, absolutely. The FBI's investigation into this horrifying case, it was an arduous, meticulous process. It took 2 full years. They weren't just looking into a single incident, remember. They were building a case that spanned almost 2 decades of continuous, horrific abuse. It required incredibly painstaking work. They had to gather every scrap of evidence, piece together fragments of this hidden life, corroborate the victim's account, and essentially prove this systematic pattern of dehumanization and control over an enormous period.
What kind of evidence did they manage to find?
Well, the evidence they ultimately compiled was damning. It painted this undeniable, absolutely horrifying picture of systematic torture and control. You had medical records, for example, detailing the victim's untreated injuries, the bone infection, the tumor which corroborated the stories of neglect. There was the chilling testimony about the locked food cabinets, a stark physical symbol of the deprivation she endured.
Right, the locked food.
Yes. And then there was the confiscated passport, which had expired years earlier. That served as concrete proof of her illegal status being used against her, eliminating any hope she might have had of escape or seeking legal recourse on her own. Every detail they uncovered seemed to back up the victim's harrowing account.
So with all that evidence compiled after 2 years, what happened next?
Well, in early 2000, with this overwhelming body of evidence meticulously gathered and firmly in hand, Renee and Margarida Bonetti were formally charged.
Both of them.
Both of them. The charges were severe, and they were precise, clearly reflecting the gravity of their crimes. They included maintaining a person in a condition analogous to slavery, conspiracy to keep her in the U.S. illegally after her visa expired, and, crucially, endangering her very life through that pattern of gross neglect and abuse. It's a comprehensive indictment. It laid bare the full extent of their cruelty and, importantly, the calculated, systematic nature of their actions over nearly 2 decades.
How did the Bonettis react? Did they have a defense?
Renee certainly did. And his defense tactic was, well, it's described as a common and utterly abhorrent tactic often seen in these kinds of exploitation cases. He attempted to frame the entire relationship not as one of employment or enslavement, but as familial. They basically argued that the victim wasn't an employee at all, but rather that she was part of the family. A grotesque distortion of the truth, clearly designed to mask the horrific abuse and paint a picture of, I suppose, benevolent patronage gone slightly wrong, rather than criminal exploitation.
Part of the family, while locking her in a basement and denying her food and medical care.
Precisely. The contradiction is staggering. And to try and lend some sort of credence to this fabrication, they even brought Margarita's mother, who was 85 years old at the time, to testify on their behalf. Trying to weave this narrative of family loyalty, perhaps, or shared history. However, the sheer weight of the evidence against them, the cold, hard facts from the medical reports, the physical evidence from the house, and especially the victim's detailed, credible testimony, it was simply overwhelming. It was impossible to ignore or refute with that kind of flimsy narrative.
So Renee was found guilty.
Yes, Renee Bonetti was found guilty on all charges. It was a significant triumph for justice, especially against such entrenched power, privilege, and deception. He was subsequently sentenced to 6 years and 5 months in prison.
6.5 years, after nearly 20 years of enslavement.
It's a sentence that many might find inadequate given the duration and severity of the abuse, absolutely. But crucially, he was also ordered to pay the victim $110,000 in retroactive wages.
Okay, that's something.
It is. It's a small but vital measure of compensation for nearly 2 decades of stolen labor, stolen dignity, stolen freedom. A recognition, at least financially, of what was taken from her.
Did the case have any broader impact beyond Renee's conviction?
Yes, definitely. And this is truly significant. The case didn't just conclude with Renee's conviction and sentencing. It resonated far beyond that specific courtroom. It served as a powerful catalyst for change at a legislative level. It directly inspired new federal legislation in the U.S., passed in 2001, specifically designed to protect foreign domestic workers. These new laws aim to ensure that workers in similar situations have explicit rights. Rights like the ability to change employers if they're being abused, and vitally, protection from that threat of deportation, the very weapon the Bonettis used so effectively to control their victim.
So her suffering led to protections for others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More broadly, this case profoundly demonstrates how individual acts of courage, like Vicki Schneider's unwavering commitment to intervene, combined with incredibly detailed, persistent investigations by law enforcement, can ultimately culminate in truly meaningful and wide-reaching systemic change. Change that impacts countless others. It's a powerful, enduring legacy born from a truly terrible ordeal.
Okay, so Renee Bonetti faced justice, served time, paid restitution. But what about Margarida? You said they were both charged, but she was the primary aggressor, according to the victim. Where was she when all this was happening?
Well, while Renee was facing justice in that U.S. courtroom, Margarida, she was already long gone.
Gone.
This is where the story takes another incredibly frustrating and, you could argue, strategically chilling turn, one that really highlights how immense privilege can sometimes, unfortunately, outmaneuver the processes of justice. Back in September 1998, this is crucial, it was well before any indictments were formally issued against her, although the investigation was likely underway. Margarida Bonetti swiftly fled the United States and returned to Brazil.
Before she was charged. How?
Her purported reason, the excuse she gave at the time, was that she needed to attend her father's funeral back in São Paulo.
Right. A convenient reason to leave the country just as things were heating up.
Extremely convenient. And this perfectly timed escape, looking back, it really appears to have been a stroke of strategic, if, of course, deeply immoral genius. She slipped away, effectively evading the looming grasp of American law enforcement, leaving René behind to face the music all by himself.
So she gets back to Brazil. Why couldn't the U.S. just demand her return, extradite her? She was facing serious federal charges.
And that's where it gets incredibly complicated, legally speaking. It all came down to a specific constitutional loophole in Brazil, a unique legal quirk that would effectively become her impenetrable shield against international justice. Brazil's constitution, specifically Article 5, Item LI, states with absolute clarity, and importantly, without exception, that no Brazilian shall be extradited. Period.
No Brazilian, ever.
That's what the Constitution states regarding native-born Brazilians. This clause, which was likely designed with the intention of protecting Brazilian citizens from potentially biased or unfair foreign prosecution, became her ultimate sanctuary. The very law intended for national protection was now, ironically, effectively protecting a fugitive accused of the most grave human rights abuses. It created this infuriating, insurmountable barrier to accountability within the U.S. legal system. And one particularly frustrating aspect here involves the layers upon layers of legal complexities that allowed this situation to persist. Now, despite Brazil's own penal code having provisions that do allow for the prosecution of its citizens for crimes committed abroad.
So Brazil could have prosecuted her themselves?
Theoretically, yes. Brazil could have initiated its own prosecution based on the evidence gathered in the U.S. However, it remains frustratingly unclear even today whether the U.S. government ever officially requested such a domestic prosecution within Brazil for Margarita's crimes.
Really? They might not have even asked.
It's ambiguous. There seems to be no public record of a formal request being lodged through the proper channels. This ambiguity, combined with that absolute constitutional non-extradition clause, it just created this perfect storm for impunity. A legal gray area that she, or perhaps her legal advisors, exploited perfectly. And then, on top of all that, there's the cruel reality of the statute of limitations, the running out the clock scenario.
How does that work?
Well, federal crimes like those Margarita was accused of relating to forced labor, conspiracy, endangering a life, typically have a 20-year statute of limitations in the U.S. That's a legal deadline. After 20 years from the time the crime or the conspiracy ended, prosecution is generally no longer possible.
And she fled in 1998.
Exactly. By the time Chico Fellini's podcast, Woman of the Abandoned House, brought this whole story roaring back into the public consciousness in 2022, more than 2 decades had already passed since her escape, and arguably since the end of the criminal activity she was charged with. The clock had, quite literally, run out. Justice, at least through the U.S. legal system, and seemingly through the Brazilian one too, due to inaction or lack of request, was no longer possible for Margarida Bonetti.
So her privilege, her timing, her nationality, it all just lined up perfectly for her to escape any consequences.
It really demonstrates starkly how her immense privilege, the resources to flee, perhaps the legal advice, the safety net of her home country's constitution, allowed her to skillfully escape a foreign legal system. It effectively bought her time and freedom. Her clever, meticulously timed flight prevented her from ever having to face justice, not just in the U.S., but also, it seems, in her own country, due to the combination of non-extradition and the eventual expiration of the statute of limitations. And this really begs an incredibly important question for all of us, doesn't it, about the nature of global justice. What does it say about the international pursuit of accountability when national laws, even those designed with noble intentions like protecting citizens, can inadvertently become these impenetrable shields for individuals accused of the gravest crimes against humanity? It's a profound challenge to the very idea of universal justice and that core principle that absolutely no one should be above the law.
So, back in São Paulo then, after her strategic escape, abandoning René to face prison alone, Margarida just retreats. Where did she go?
She retreated into the very family mansion where she had grown up, the grand house in Higienópolis, the house that would eventually become infamous, known locally and then internationally as a Casa Abandonada, the abandoned house.
The same crumbling mansion the neighbors whispered about.
The very same one. And this mansion, which once symbolized her family's opulence, their social standing, their connection to the elite of São Paulo, now became this chilling physical manifestation of her own psychological state. It slowly decayed, mirroring, it seems, her own descent into this paranoid reclusion, a self-imposed exile within walls that were literally crumbling around her. The once grand home became her fortress of neglect, a tomb of secrets.
And the white cream, the mask the neighbor saw.
Yes, that thick white ointment she habitually applied to her face, the thing the neighbors had noted with such curiosity and unease, that became, symbolically at least, her final barrier. A bizarre, almost grotesque mask she wore, perhaps to hide her identity from a world she increasingly believed was conspiring against her, a world that might at any moment expose her truth.
Did anyone ever manage to speak to her? To confront her?
Yes. The investigative journalist Chico Felitti, whose incredible podcast work really brought this story crashing back into the international spotlight, he eventually tracked her down. He managed the almost impossible task of actually interviewing her in 2022 inside that decaying house.
Wow. What was she like after all those years?
Well, according to Felitti's account, it was clear that her 2-decade-long exile, confined within those decaying walls, surrounded by filth and neglect and trapped within her own delusion, had taken a severe toll on her mental state. She appeared paranoid, detached. But what was truly chilling, truly unsettling about the interview was that all that time, all that isolation, it hadn't bred even a shred of remorse, not a flicker. Her denial of the accusations, the horrific crime she was charged with, was absolute, unwavering, and frankly deeply disturbing in its sheer intensity. She remained utterly convinced of her own innocence, despite the mountain of evidence, despite Renee's conviction.
Just complete denial. How does she explain it away?
Her denial was, well, it was a masterful, if utterly pathetic, display of psychological dissociation. She dismissed all the accusations leveled against her as total imbecility. She claimed they were all part of this vast, elaborate conspiracy. The conspiracy orchestrated, in her mind, by lawyers, by the FBI, even by the victim herself, all colluding, apparently, to unjustly accuse her and ruin her life.
Blaming everyone but yourself.
Completely. And she even took it a step further, referring to the accused Margarida, the one detailed in the court documents, the one convicted in the court of public opinion in the third person. She said, with this chilling detachment, that Margarida there is not me. I am not that person. They invented a person.
Wow. Creating an entirely separate identity for the perpetrator.
Exactly. This linguistic detachment, this psychological maneuver, it allowed her to emotionally distance herself completely from her own horrific actions, to create this alternate reality where she wasn't the perpetrator at all, but rather the victim of this grand conspiracy.
Was there any sign, any hint at all, that she recognized the suffering she caused, any remorse for the victim?
Absolutely none, according to the reports of the interview. What's truly disturbing, what really stands out, is the profound, terrifying lack of remorse. She denied all the abuse, point blank. Even the horrific medical neglect, the things that were meticulously documented in court records, like the tumor. She chillingly claimed that the victim's cantaloupe-sized tumor, the direct result, remember, of her prolonged denial of essential medical care, was merely a benign thing, something insignificant, and she attributed it, incredibly, to the victim simply eating too many sweets.
Eating too many sweets for a massive tumor, that's beyond callous.
It's shockingly callous, and it's factually absurd. It illustrates this complete and utter lack of empathy, a chilling inability, or perhaps refusal, to recognize the immense suffering she directly inflicted, or even to acknowledge the basic reality of what transpired over those 2 decades. It's really a powerful, unsettling reminder, isn't it, that true evil isn't always some snarling, cartoonish villain from a movie. Sometimes it's an unrepentant, deeply delusional individual hiding behind the impenetrable walls of immense privilege, denial, and in this case, a bizarre layer of thick white cream. It's the banality of evil made horrifyingly visible and utterly, terrifyingly unrepentant.
It's critical, though, isn't it, for us to understand that Margarida Bonetti's case, as high-profile and deeply unsettling as it is, it's not some freak occurrence, it's not an isolated incident in Brazil.
No, absolutely not. And that's a crucial point. The exposure of her story, thanks largely to a Mulher de Casa Abandonada podcast, while shocking to many both in Brazil and internationally, it really shone a vital spotlight on a much broader, deeply disturbing phenomenon. That phenomenon is the ongoing and pervasive epidemic of domestic worker exploitation in Brazil, a modern form of slavery that often goes unseen, unreported. Bonetti's case, in fact, helped to bring into sharp focus what journalists and activists in Brazil are now widely referring to as the Madalena effect.
The Madalena effect? What's that?
It's named after Madalena Gordiano. She was another victim of horrific domestic servitude, rescued in 2020 after an astonishing 38 years of exploitation. 38 years living in conditions analogous to slavery within a supposedly respectable family home.
38 years. Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's almost impossible to comprehend. And her case, much like Bonetti's later, ignited this huge surge in public awareness across Brazil. The intense media scrutiny, the public outcry over Madalena's story, it led, crucially, to a dramatic increase in reported rescues of other domestic workers trapped in similar horrific conditions. People started looking more closely, reporting things they might have ignored before.
So these high-profile cases actually helped uncover more victims.
Exactly. The statistics themselves are truly sobering, and they really underscore the vast scale of this hidden crisis. Between just 2017 and 2021 alone, just a 4-year period, 101 domestic workers were officially rescued from conditions analogous to slavery in Brazil.
Over 100 people in 4 years.
And those are just the ones officially identified and rescued. It strongly suggests the real number is likely much, much higher. This isn't some historical footnote, some distant memory of a bygone era. It's a living, breathing problem, a tragic reality for many, many individuals in Brazil today.
What are the common factors in these cases? Are there patterns?
Yes, there are depressingly consistent patterns. If we connect this to the bigger picture, looking beyond just Bonetti or Madalena, it becomes abundantly clear that this isn't just about a handful of bad apples, a few isolated incidents of cruelty by a few warped individuals. This is a systemic problem. It's deeply rooted in Brazil's complex and painful history of slavery. Remember, Brazil was one of the very last countries in the entire world to abolish slavery in 1888. And tragically, the problem is exacerbated by profound, long-seated racial and social inequalities that absolutely persist to this day. The common patterns identified in these modern-day slavery cases are heartbreakingly consistent. The victims are overwhelmingly Black women. They often come from very low-income backgrounds, frequently from rural areas, and typically have limited access to education. This leaves them profoundly vulnerable, often with very few perceived alternatives or resources to fight back.
And the perpetrator.
The perpetrators, often from wealthy, influential families, employ the same abhorrent playbook time and time again. They inflict verbal and physical abuse. They engage in severe food deprivation, controlling access to basic sustenance. They enforce extreme social isolation, cutting off contact with family, with friends, confiscating phones. And then in this truly grotesque twist, they often claim, just like Margarida Bonetti tried to, that the victim was like family. They use this language to try and normalize the exploitation, to justify the abuse, transforming profound cruelty into some twisted form of familial care or obligation.
That, like, family line is just chilling when you know the reality.
It's utterly chilling, and it really raises that important, difficult question for all of us, but perhaps especially for Brazilian society. How deeply are these historical shadows, the legacy of slavery, the deeply entrenched social and racial hierarchies, still impacting society today? How are they manifesting in these horrific contemporary forms of bondage? It speaks to a societal wound that is clearly still far from healed, a truth that absolutely must be acknowledged, confronted, and addressed head-on.
So, while Margarida Bonetti remained in her decaying mansion, trapped in denial, what happened to the woman she victimized for nearly 20 years? What did her journey look like after the rescue?
Well, her journey stands in such stark, powerful contrast to Margarita's, doesn't it? While Bonetti retreated into delusion and decay, the victim of her decades of cruelty found a new path, a profoundly different life, a journey from those chains to freedom that is, frankly, nothing short of miraculous, considering what she endured.
What did that freedom look like for her?
After her harrowing rescue, she was granted humanitarian protection in the U.S. This was a vital first step. It finally allowed her access to the proper medical care that had been so cruelly, deliberately denied to her for decades. She received comprehensive treatment for those tumors which, by the way, were confirmed to be malignant and required serious intervention, not just from eating too many sweets. She also got treatment for other pressing health issues that had festered untreated for years. Finally, she could begin to address the physical scars of her past.
That must have been life-changing in itself.
Absolutely. And beyond the essential medical care, friends, people who are touched by her story, horrified by her immense suffering, perhaps including Vicky Schneider and others involved in her rescue, they rallied around her with incredible generosity and empathy. They actually set up a pension fund for her. This ensured her financial security, gave her a stability she had never ever known in her life. It allowed her to live out her later years with a measure of dignity, independence, and peace that had been stolen from her for so long.
And how is she doing today?
Today, she's in her mid-80s, and by all accounts, she stands as this incredible testament to human resilience, to the strength of the human spirit. She lives a life reportedly marked by strong faith, finding peace and purpose after enduring the unimaginable. And crucially, she has absolutely no contact whatsoever with her former captor, Margarida Bonetti. She has completely, definitively severed all ties with that incredibly painful chapter of her life. Her journey from the absolute depths of bondage and despair to the light of freedom and recovery, it really is a true, powerful inspiration.
It really is a story of survival against incredible odds.
And I think one particularly compelling aspect here is just that incredible human capacity for survival and for profound healing. Even after enduring decades, literally decades, of unimaginable suffering, physical and psychological torture, her courage, remember, in stepping forward, in finding her voice after years of enforced silence, and providing that detailed, crucial testimony. It wasn't only instrumental in securing justice in her own case, Eliza against Renee Bonetti, bringing a measure of accountability. It also played that truly crucial role in shaping and creating those new federal laws we talked about, laws that continue today to protect countless other foreign domestic workers, ensuring, hopefully, that they don't fall prey to the same horrific exploitation she endured. Her voice, once so brutally silenced and suppressed for so long, ultimately became this powerful force for systemic change. A ripple effect of freedom extending far beyond her own experience. It's just a remarkable legacy, isn't it? A legacy of resilience, dignity, and incredibly far-reaching impact.
So, looking back at this whole story, Margarida Bonetti, the abandoned house, the victim's ordeal and survival, it's far more than just a sensational true crime narrative, isn't it? It's a really powerful, very sobering lesson. A lesson in both the shocking depths human depravity can reach, but also, crucially, in the extraordinary capacity for courageous intervention by ordinary people, people like Vicky Schneider. And it serves as this urgent, vital reminder that modern slavery isn't some relic of a distant, dark past that we've safely confined to history books. It is a hidden reality. It's thriving right now, today, often behind the seemingly ordinary, respectable, closed doors of homes in our very own neighborhoods. Maybe even the ones right next to yours.
That's the chilling takeaway, isn't it? The proximity, the hidden nature of it all.
Yeah. And as part of the Urban Herald team, we really believe it's on all of us, on everyone listening, to try and be the Vicky Schneiders of the world. We need to be vigilant. We can't just dismiss those gut feelings when something seems off about a situation or about how someone is being treated. If you suspect, even just suspect, that someone might be a victim of domestic worker exploitation or human trafficking in any form, don't just whisper about it. Don't just rationalize it away. Act on it. And there are tangible signs, identifiable signs of exploitation that you can look out for. We should probably list a few, right?
Yes, that's important practical information.
Okay, so things like a worker who consistently appears fearful, maybe submissive, avoids eye contact, or shows visible signs of physical abuse, unexplained injuries, bruises, burns. Someone who isn't allowed to speak for themselves, who always defers to an employer standing right there, or is prevented from leaving the house unaccompanied. Real signs of extreme control and isolation. A person who clearly has no access to their own identity, documents their passport, their visa, or perhaps more subtly, no control over their own wages, indicating a complete lack of financial independence and personal autonomy. Someone who appears to be working excessively long hours. Maybe you see them working early morning till late at night, 7 days a week with no apparent time off, no breaks, maybe looking exhausted all the time with little or no compensation. And often, though not always, a domestic worker living in visibly substandard conditions compared to their employers. Maybe you know they live in a basement or a windowless attic room or a separate, poorly maintained outbuilding. That stark, dehumanizing contrast can be a red flag, highlighting their unequal, controlled status.
Those are all critical indicators, things that should prompt concern at the very least.
Exactly. So if you see something like that, say something. Your intuition, your observation, it could be the spark that uncovers a hidden horror story just like this one. And there are resources. In Brazil, you can report suspected cases anonymously to the Secretaria Especial de Previdência e Trabalho. That's the Special Secretariat for Social Security and Labor. Here in the U.S., you can contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have resources, they can advise, they can take action. Your intervention, just a single act of courage, of picking up the phone, of making that report, it could be the very first and maybe the only step towards freedom for a person living right now in modern-day bondage, trapped and suffering in silence.
And, the abandoned house itself, the physical structure in Indianapolis, it may soon be gone. Perhaps it's already been demolished, or will be soon, erasing its physical presence from São Paulo's landscape. But the profound, chilling lessons it holds, those must live on. They need to be etched deeply into our collective conscience. a constant uncomfortable reminder of what can happen when we allow privilege, when we allow indifference to shield profound cruelty. We owe it to the victims, those like the woman in this story who survived, those like Maddalena Gordiano, and undoubtedly countless others whose stories we don't yet know. We owe it to them to ensure that the secrets hidden within the opulent, privileged walls of some homes can never again stand in the way of justice, accountability, and basic human dignity.
A powerful point to end on.
And perhaps this raises one final important question for all of us, a question that lingers long after this specific story concludes, and one that really demands our ongoing introspection. What other hidden stories, what other forms of unseen suffering are still waiting right now to be unmasked in our own communities, in our very own neighborhoods? And maybe more importantly, what vital role will you play in bringing them into the light?